Okay, this feels unwinnable. What's going wrong? I have absolutely no clue. If only there was a way to actually quantify how much each player was contributing to the match, and not just via arbitrary numbers that can easily be manipulated without genuinely furthering our team's chances of winning. Or in layman's terms, what if there was a literal contribution meter? There seems to be a lot of outrage right now about the current state and future of Overwatch 2. And rightly so, I think. Now, I know a lot of people echo the sentiment that we are just nitpicking and biased, and the devs are working very hard, we should be nicer, and don't knock it till you try it, and things can still change, and things will never change? But I'm here to tell you that STFU. Your argument is stupid and so are you. Criticism is incredibly vital, and if you don't think so, well, I don't have much more breath to spare on you. Maybe in the future. But back to a sane world where we can say we like and dislike stuff, what if I said the most important change to Overwatch has already happened? And if it remains the way it is now, Overwatch will have lost one of the most vital and impressive features it had. There's an old saying in Overwatch culture, you've probably heard it before. The legend goes, good players on fire. But what if I told you that good players were on fire? Well, I imagine I might be met with the same arguments I see on live when I bring up the fire system. Fire literally doesn't matter. You can get on fire for just touching cart. That just means you pressed Q. I'm a tank/healer. I'm doing my job. I just can't get on fire / it doesn't matter. Or my absolute favorite, will I have gold medal / play of the game / a card at the end? Well, to start this video, I'm going to have to prove to you that the fire system is both incredibly meaningful and at the very least substantially more accurate than any of its competitors. Let's start in order. I'm finally living out a fantasy everyone has where you get to respond to someone's terrible argument that you didn't have time to counter in the moment. I'll be addressing these statements I've heard made by real Overwatch players, starting with this one. Fire literally doesn't matter. This one is, at the heart of it, both the most important and broad one, as well as the most baffling to me. Fire does not matter. Well, let's look for a second what gets you fire. Dealing damage to an enemy before they die, dealing the final blow to an enemy, CCing an enemy, CCing an enemy before they die, debuffing an enemy before they die, buffing an ally before they kill someone, healing a teammate before they kill someone, blocking enemy damage, furthering the objective's progression past a capture threshold, preventing an objective's progression on defense, dealing damage to someone who dies while attempting to capture an objective, resurrecting a teammate. It's quite a lot of things, but to start, let me ask this. Can you win a game without doing any of these? Well, you could say, yes, I was AFK and we won. What I mean is, could you win without anyone on your team doing any of these? Well, yes again, but you'd actively need the entire enemy team to leave the game. Barring this outlier, no. Without progressing any of your team's fire meters, you literally cannot win. When you look at it on the face of it, Overwatch's fire system is basically a real-time meter representing a player's contribution to the match. Essentially, whether intentionally or not, the fire system was designed as a way for the game to take all of a player's actions and combine the ones that actually benefited your team in a meaningful way, assign them values based on how beneficial they were towards your team winning the match, and finally reward you with points based on these calculations. In fact, it's quite difficult to find things that contribute towards winning the match that are not tracked by the fire system. These include taking space, shield damage, taxiing, staggering, displacement, and regrouping, as well as things outside of the game itself such as shot calling and keeping up morale. It should be evident that these things fire does not track are generally either tech the average player may not know, or more nebulous concepts that the game couldn't hope to track. While it's a shame the game cannot truly perfectly track a player's usefulness given these metrics are important yet cannot be registered or measured, that really doesn't matter. There is no metric that can perfectly measure a player's contribution to a game. It just isn't really feasible. But do not let that get you down on the importance or relevance of the fire system. On the contrary, admitting that perfection is impossible is typically the first healthy step to appreciating something, and this situation is no different. As it stands, fire is currently, and I say this with a gravity I cannot stress enough, the most accurate and impressive system for measuring a player's usefulness in a team game that I have come across to date. I've tried playing several other games over the years, and not once have I felt that the game even had an inkling of the accuracy of player worth that Overwatch did, especially given that Overwatch is a game with 3 distinct roles. Now, mind you, Overwatch is one of those specific characters where technically each role has the capability to do almost all of the useful things the other roles can, just with more of a focus on certain things. But let's look at a different example. I'll use what some people see as Overwatch's biggest competitor, for whatever reason, Valorant. I think just about every Valorant player by this point has accepted 2 truths about Valorant's scoring systems. A, that they are arbitrary, and because of the actual useful contributions most players make to the team are hard to track or assign a numerical weighted value to, such as smoking or entrying, the entire system ends up being essentially meaningless. And B, that is completely right and always the paragon of skillful playing that should be looked toward when one wants to know who on the team to blame for a loss. Yes, every Valorant player seems to understand both of these truths, just not at the same time. If the scoreboard says they're feeding, they will remember the former point, and if they're high on the scoreboard, they'll instead develop amnesia of their former views and believe the latter. Essentially, every Valorant player only sees the scoreboard as either lying when it says they've done poorly, or infallible if it says they're doing well. In truth, the scoreboard is honestly an absolute lie, and no, I'm not just jaded because I suck. I still suck, but normally I play Cypher and sit in the back all day lurking, so my score comes out to look something like this. But this story doesn't display the whole picture of my poor entry frag who got us space every game and yet ended up with both less kills and less damage than me. The scoreboard is just incredibly, undeniably, objectively arbitrary. It is technically great at understanding certain aspects of the state of the game, but the issue lies with how players look to it when trying to swiftly find someone to blame. And the scoreboard, even if designed for this, is just not equipped for such insights. Bringing this back to Overwatch, I have seen the exact same treatment done with Overwatch's systems. Medals have typically been the go-to for these patterns, given that they are the only metric you can continue to view throughout the match when you still have time to change things or harass people into submission, while also being able to be viewed at any time and still have values about the entire match, not just the recent contributions of players. Although medals have started to go out of vogue as smarter players have recognized how arbitrary they are, and they are arbitrary, I'll get to that in a moment, players have started to look to endgame cards as the better alternative. Admittedly something I used to do before I was enlightened. And some trogs still think play of the game means anything beyond you did something semi-cool / got a boop. But we'll get to that. Let's address each of these, because as it stands, I need a third absurd bunny trail because I'm psychotic and have you mentally hostage! Don't worry, I'm just as mentally hostage as you are, even more so because it's my own mind! Ah! Where are the bees coming from? First, medals are meaningless. I'll say this game after game. Medals are meaningless. If you've ever had a Moira claim to have 4 or even 5 gold medals, you should know this already. But if you don't, I'll use 2 points. First, let's look at each medal individually. Eliminations, or elims, means you've dealt damage to someone before they died. Sadly, unlike fire, how much you did does not matter. If you get 3 elims for dealing 1,400 damage in total, that is still counted as severely less impactful than someone who got 8 elims for dealing 16 damage. Now to skip ahead, because it's relevant, what about the damage medal, which is supposedly the most important? A player who gets 15 final blows and deals 3,000 damage is someone considered much less useful than a player who only got 2 final blows but dealt 6,000 damage while repeatedly shooting Roadhog and giving the enemy healers an obscene amount of ult charge. Remember, because elims aren't final blows, Player 2 in this situation could still have gold damage and elims so long as he just shot someone other than Roadhog a few times, while all of Player 1's 15 kills were solo kills 200 to 0 HP. See how these medals can be incredibly meaningless and even easy to manipulate by throwers / people who just want a stat pad so they don't get blamed? Not to mention that one DPS can have 12k damage and have a gold medal, and the other can have 11k, but still not have any damage medal because the tanks have 11.4 and 11.5 respectively. Just because poor DPS 2 had slightly less damage, it's his fault now and he should feel bad. Let's all report him! Now, moving on to objective time. Finally, we have the coolest kid that nobody on the planet has ever bragged about. Yet you will always get as your endgame card despite getting 5 gold medals. Objective kills. Yay! You did 2 damage to people while on point. Cool. Finally, there's healing, and while I could just mention the whole repeatedly shooting Roadhog but this time he's on your team thing, I'll use the other point I wanted to make about medals. Who do you want on your team? Would you rather have the Ana who's hit 15 sleeps this game, 10 offensive nades, saved your life twice with the defensive nade, and who's gotten nano every time your Genji or tank needed it, but who has silver healing? Or 4 gold medal Moira? Go ahead, be honest. God is listening! Now, it should be obvious that medals are meaningless, but you shouldn't be tricked into thinking cards mean anything either. Here's the revelation that I had. Hopefully you'll take it the same way. Remember how I described the on-fire system as essentially boiling down to a contribution meter? Let's just describe what a card is, and then compare that to what it takes to win an Overwatch match. Overwatch cards are a set of the highest stats from an Overwatch match. There are 2 important distinctions to make about this. First, a set of means there are a number of stats that could have been used for the cards at the end of the match, but the game is only displaying 4 of them normally. Second, these are just the highest stats of each specific metric. So if you get a card, it means you did something specific more than anyone else, such as healing, which is good. But your card does not tell even the slightest story about what else you did during the match. So if you were holding Heal Beam on a frenzied Rhine the entire game, but literally never rezzed or stood on payload, you can still get a card. Or better yet, if you AFK'd on the point the entire game, never shot, never used your cooldowns other than for survival, but still touched point longer than anyone else, you'd get objective time. Obviously these are extreme examples, but as it stands, you only have to do one thing to get a card at the end of the game. So someone who does everything really well, but not best, can get no cards, while someone who is almost AFK can get a card. Hell, even someone who did some things better than everyone else in the match can still get no card if the system happens to decide it wants to display 4 other stats from the game. While doing one thing better than anyone in a match is commendable, it is by no means a sign you were a large factor in benefiting your team. And honestly, I think this system was kinda designed in a way where the devs knew this. It's literally just there for you to say, thanks for holding left click, Mercy, unless you got the MVP card, in which case you probably did carry. If you still disagree, here. Never mind, cards are good. Okay, I don't really need to address this, but in case you are permanently on monkey mode and think play the game means anything, no. You can be present and useful for 10 seconds of a 15-minute match and get play. Please go back to Silly Guy Town. You're bringing down the curve. Where the hell was I? Medals, cards, oh, right. We should address the other arguments people have made against fire. You can get on fire for just touching the card. Well, yes. Yeah. Wait, do you think there shouldn't be any recognition for touching card? Wow. Can you imagine if someone was so out of touch with reality that they thought pushing the payload was meaningless and didn't deserve any recognition? That would be crazy! Okay, but to be serious, I think what he meant was touching cart should not be enough to get you on fire. Which, it's not. Touching the cart only provides minimal amounts of fire and cannot get you on fire by itself. It's only after contributing in other ways effectively that touching the cart can be the final straw in getting you on fire. And if he was implying this is a bad thing, why? I get that touching cart is not skill-based, but I never said the fire system was a skill meter. I said it was a contribution meter, which is entirely different. It shouldn't matter to the meter how hard it is for someone to do something. What should matter is whether or not what they have done has helped the team attain victory. Touching cart is essential to winning the game, and to treat it like it's meaningless is absurd. In a world where nothing about the game recognizes and rewards touching cart, those who actively choose to benefit their team will most often be met with vitriol when the team loses, which is something important to bring up here. I know a lot of arguments against the new scoreboard, which we will get to, by the way, point out that showing people's stats openly will lead to toxicity, but this is ridiculous. Anyone who thinks this clearly has lost touch with reality. Overwatch 1 as it is currently already harbors an excessive amount of toxicity for that exact same reason. Players want someone to blame. The only difference here is that without a metric for recognizing contribution, the blame is shoved onto people randomly or wrongfully, whereas with the fire system, it can at least not be directed at people least deserving of it. I'm not condoning flaming, but I would much prefer if flaming was more often aimed at people who are not helping, rather than at people who are doing their best for the team, or more often, anyone who hasn't switched character recently. Sadly, the scoreboard as it is again way too nebulous and non-conducive to actually gleaning any real understanding of players' contributions. But again, we'll get to that. Next, I've heard, "That just means you pressed Q." Which again, I must say, so? If I pressed Q and me pressing Q meant we are winning, I'm sure glad as hell I bothered to press it. It's irrelevant if pressing Q was difficult, so long as what I'm doing is benefiting the team, it shouldn't matter if a chimp could have done it. What's most confusing is that these same players who say this are the ones trying to explain away why someone else is on fire and they're not, while in the process of blaming that person for their loss, which calls into question why they haven't pressed Q to get on fire. If it's so easy to do it, then why don't you do it? Better yet, if just pressing any lousy Q gets you on fire, I sure hope you're farming your ult as fast as you can. If my Qs are getting me on fire longer than you, must suck to suck. Moving on. Ooh, next is a good one.
I'm tank/healer. I'm doing my job. I can't get on fire / it doesn't matter.
This is one I hear a lot, which, first of all, is incredibly confusing to me given that I also hear, "You're a healer, you didn't do anything," and "You're a tank, you pressed Q." Well, I get that these arguments are typically made by different people. Oddly convenient that these views are always held by a person on the role that is currently being portrayed as hard to be on fire with. Seems to me like it's Valorant syndrome all over again. But to address it all, no, you're wrong. If you want the truth, actually, I've done the math. Good for you! Here is the extensive results of my math. While it's evident the roles do not garner fire points exactly equally as quickly, the margins between these numbers are negligible. Or again, in layman's terms, they are almost the same. It is mathematically, objectively, no, you cannot have an opinion here, we are dealing in fact, not much more difficult to be on fire with any role than the other roles. So you can stop saying this. Math disagrees. Argue with him. Hopefully you agree with me that the fire system is good, but I want to do something special here. Not many people know about this little tech, and even less Overwatch players know it. But did you know you can actually criticize something you like? Crazy, I know, but let's try it out for fun. What will I criticize? Ooh, how about the fire meter? How appropriate, right? The first thing I wanted to address was this. The fire meter is technically derived from values that literally just some person or people came up with. As much as I've talked it up, technically these numerical values placed on the actions a player can take to contribute to the team are, well, subjective. There could easily be arguments that fire needs to be tweaked, and every person on the planet could come in and say, oh, fire doesn't reward enough for this, or oh, fire rewards too much for that, or why on earth does unstaggering Baby Diva count as much as a full kill? Why is throwing considered good for my team? But instead of just choosing random gripes, I actually have two specific ones. Why these two? Well, I'm gonna cite my really credible source yet again, my good friend Math. When I did the math to determine how much fire a character gets relative to how often they win a match, I found that there are two massive outliers on the lower end of the scale, Wrecking Ball and Mercy. If you've played either of these characters extensively, or if you main them, I imagine you might not be the biggest fan of the fire system, and rightly so. You've probably been told by the fire system time and time again that you are subpar and not really contributing to the team much. But why? Well, personally, I like to cite two specific reasons, one for each character. First, Wrecking Ball. Poor Hammond, already looked down upon by the community for being such a difficult character to understand and find value with, and even still when you do, the fire system does not reward you justly. I think a lot of Wrecking Ball's issues lie with the fact that he's a character very concerned with disruption and pulling attention, neither of which are tracked by fire, and neither of which can be easily fixed. But I think there's an easy thing Blizzard could fix that would at least help his numbers get more into an accurate area. Wrecking Ball does not get assist fire on targets he knocks back. This is absurd. Why on earth he shouldn't be given fire for the displacement that led to a kill confounds me. Alongside this, it would honestly make sense if Hammond's E actually counted as blocking damage whenever he got shot during it. It's pretty much pulling just as much value as a shield would, so long as he's being shot, so no reason to not change this. Finally, we have Mercy. Mercy mains know how difficult it is to be on fire with Mercy, but there's no better feeling than being the only person in the lobby on fire as Mercy. This is truly euphoria. But there is a super easy fix for giving Mercy the amount of fire she deserves. I can't guarantee she'll be fully fixed either, but this will at the very least treat her more fairly for the amount of value she outputs. Literally just make the res count for 100 fire. I can't conceive why the devs decided that bringing someone back to life is so much less valuable than killing someone. Especially when you can even get more fire for only partially killing someone than you can get for entirely solo reviving someone. But I imagine it's just that continued Mercy hatred the devs have been openly displaying. I know arguments can be made about how valuable a res actually is, and I'd say a res on someone who's literally just died is much better than on someone who is about to respawn, but the fire meter doesn't have to be this complicated. A res should just be equal to a solo kill, so 100 fire. So obviously fire isn't perfect, but Overwatch losing fire is a big deal, and I need to express why. In order to do this, beyond what I've already done, we need to take a look at the new scoreboard and compare it with how Overwatch players actually think/act. To begin, I'm just gonna say it. The Overwatch 2 scoreboard is a step in the right direction, and I support it. But if this is the final product and nothing else changes, it is a massive downgrade. Here's why. The Overwatch 2 scoreboard essentially takes most of the trackable stats that all heroes share and puts them on display for everyone to see. These are quite similar to medals, but tend to be somewhat less meaningless. Damage mitigated and assists have been added, thank God, and objective kills and objective time have been removed. While I can admit I think the devs didn't really know how the game would play out when they made objective kills, and nobody's ever really cared about them, the exclusion of objective time is absurd, but we've already addressed this. Now, the scoreboard is yet again an upgrade to medals because it makes all this info public, whereas before this was all kinda secret, for absolutely no reason. Honestly, trying to understand anything just using the former medal system felt like trying to play detective in a mystery about who threw your match. But with these changes, things are still not fixed. Sure, you won't get that prior situation we mentioned where one DPS gets flamed for having no damage medal just because the 4 highest damage positions are all within 1,000 of each other, but you could easily still get the whole guy with several solo kills having worse stats than the guy shooting Roadhog the whole game scenario. And that isn't even the main problem here, and here's why. I think we've established that looking at each stat individually is meaningless if you don't take the others into consideration, and that the stats tracked by the scoreboard/medals can be manipulated easily without actually contributing much to the team. So when an Overwatch player is in a match, and they want to understand why they are losing, or even inversely why they're winning, and they look at this, what are they supposed to glean? What is the specific method they should use in order to understand the impact each player is having on the match? How can the super carry Ana we mentioned earlier possibly outshine the Moira in such a cluttered stat board? The answer? She can't. It's just not possible. And even worse, I may have asked what should an Overwatch player do to understand this scoreboard, but the actual more relevant question here is what will they do? Well, I've played a lot of Overwatch over the years. I've spent time in each and every rank, and I think I've become accustomed to how Overwatch players operate. I have the aim of a paraplegic squirrel, and yet I've hit some big boy numbers just using game sense and negotiation tactics, so I think I've come to understand the chaotic psyche of an Overwatch player. And how do Overwatch players look at stats? What combination of stats do they look at to understand how good a player is? What benchmark do they set for players they add to their tryhard mains only stack? What values do they assign to different statistics when considering the worth of any Overwatch player? Well, they don't. Overwatch players typically do not check multiple stats or have some sense in their head of how much they value stats when compared to each other. Typically, each Overwatch player falls under a different philosophy. We can look at these philosophies as religions, because each player typically subscribes to a belief system held by several others. We have the Elims believers, the Deaths per 10 believers, who are genuinely deranged, and finally, the most common sect, the Damage per 10 minutes believers. From every group leader of a tryhard stack I've ever talked to, typically they will say something akin to, when someone joins the group, I check blank stat, and then I decide if I'm kicking them or not. Well, this stat can change depending on the person, or even the role of the person they're assessing. It should be evident here what the issue is with this. We already discussed earlier that this kind of tunnel vision view can't even remotely accurately assess a player's worth. Well then, I'm not stupid, and generalizing can be pretty stupid. So what about the outliers, the people who bother to check more than one stat? Well, while there could be some factors they look for, or even a calculation they use, how on earth are they going to have the time to accurately assess anything when they have this many factors to take into account? The numbers are this easily manipulated, and they only have a few seconds because their match is currently ongoing. The answer is simple. They can't. And this, my friends, is why we need fire. There needs to be a quick access system that assesses multiple factors, assigns them values that cannot be easily manipulated, and accurately determines what is useful to a team. And Overwatch already has this, the fire system. There's just one issue. It cannot easily be cumulatively tracked. If you are already enlightened and have realized the importance of fire, and you have wanted to justify your pick/play to someone on your team or the other, or if you just wanted to glean who truly is throwing your match, you may have come to recognize just how hard it is to accurately track time on fire during the match. Because the fire system is something that only displays between a binary of on fire or not on fire, and never accurately reminds players how long any player has been on fire prior to any moment, as it stands, the only place players can accurately come to understand any one player's impact on the match is through the replay system. The fire system is incredibly useful because it is the only system in the game that actually takes a myriad of factors into consideration when determining how much each player has contributed to the success of their team, but it falls short in actually displaying these findings to players. This is why the new scoreboard absolutely needs one of two things. I will preface this by saying the fire system absolutely must come back. I can't even begin to understand why game developers choose to ditch the things they do better than literally everyone else. Did you guys even see the dev post where they talked about removing fire? It was like, oh, metals are bad for the game, so we're removing metals and fire. Huh? What? Okay, but for when fire comes back, it needs to be implemented beyond what it was before, in one of two ways. First, if we want to replicate the old system as closely as possible, then just re-implement fire and add a time on fire tracker to the scoreboard for every player. Do not private it. If any stat should be public, even if all the other stats are made private, it should not be this one. Blizzard, please. You will literally not prevent any toxicity and will only promote it being hurled at team players. Finally, many players might actually like to see this one more. Instead of bringing back the old fire system as it was and simply tracking it, instead rework it to be the old Overwatch scoreboard. If you have ever looked at the old Overwatch beta scoreboard, you may have noticed the score column. You know, typically the most important thing to a scoreboard? Well, the fire system most likely came from this. The current fire system can easily be reworked to instead input all fire values into this score and discard the need for the bar itself. It can be argued whether or not this form of the system is healthier, but in all likelihood, tracking all contributions instead of just contributions that get you within a certain threshold is most likely the more accurate way to assess usefulness. Blizzard, I'm going to be completely serious here. I would honestly buy your battle pass if you put this in. Don't you want my money? I don't like your game right now. Well, Overwatch 2 sucks, but you still have time to get my money. Come on, just add fire. Come on, little fella, go ahead. Either way works, just put it on the scoreboard. Okay, no, seriously, on an actual note, I deadass would care significantly more about Overwatch if they implemented either of these. I would love a world where instead of having to argue with the trogs of gold that I'm literally a T500 smurf, that I could just point out the game says I'm carrying. Can you imagine how many players would be left the alone because nobody would just randomly target them with hatred? Let's be honest. Typically, the player who has a fit and tells the other players to either switch or kill themselves is the guy who is not contributing anything. And speaking of which, if you're wondering why half this video has been someone other than me, well, hopefully you actually paid some attention to their gameplay. After one round of this match, this player decided that our team was brain dead and felt the need to tell us all such. I want to preface this by saying, please do not seek out this player for any harm or malice. And honestly, don't even think too ill of them. I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be a YouTuber and we aren't allowed to start hate mobs, but because this person genuinely wasn't that bad. They said one or two things about our team sucking and being uncarryable, then went silent. If I wanted to use clips from a player who really does deserve hate, I could have. But I specifically chose this game because of the relevance of the fire system here. Our friendly neighborhood healer here told us that we were brain dead, but according to the fire system, they were literally of no worth, at least comparatively, which is the lens through which the fire system should be viewed. Each match is a vacuum, with the time on fire being relative to the times on fire of other players. That, however, can't excuse blaming your team when you were literally never on fire. If you've been debating in your head whether or not I'm right about this whole fire rant, I encourage you to go back and rewatch the gameplay. This player spends time on multiple different heroes, a few of which have some of the highest fire rates in the game. If you want to save time, I'd recommend at least checking out the third point of attack. Again, I'm not actually trying to target this player, they genuinely weren't that mean. But think about a world where the fire system was trackable. This player would end the round, check the scoreboard, hopefully, and instead of joining chat to call us idiots, would possibly reflect on their own play. Obviously, one of us could, in that scenario, BM them back, but given none of us did, and they still had the audacity to get upset with us, I think the odds of less toxicity in that world are pretty good. Now, I already criticized the fire system earlier, but I'd like to touch on one more caveat to the fire system. Remember when I mentioned things that the fire system cannot track, even within the game? A lot of those were higher level concepts that play a large role in the gameplay at high level. It's for this reason that I believe the further you are from average rank, the less accurate fire becomes. I would guess maybe a healthy place to stop really paying a ton of attention to it is in Masters and above. Sure, Diamond features a lot of these more nebulous concepts, but players still often fall into the pitfalls of garnering very little value while not understanding why. I'd say for gold games, the fire system is damn near infallible, and if you're playing near this rank, I highly suggest you pay more attention to it if you'd like to improve. Sure, it can be wonky at times, but overall you'll have an edge over most of the other players, genuinely being able to tell the level of contribution each player is outputting. Just be sure not to get too caught up in it, as in its current state, tracking fire accurately can lead to not paying enough attention to the match. And paying attention to the match often means you're not able to accurately quantify each player's time on fire. So just keep that in mind before getting upset with anybody during the match. And even if you aren't near gold, there's no harm in bringing up the fire meter to defend your play if someone is flaming you or others around you. It may not be as accurate, but you can still point out that the closest thing to an objective opinion in the match disagrees with their flame. At this point, it would make sense if you were thinking, Seto, this stuff is nice and all, and I agree the fire meter sounds good. Why is any of that important? Don't you think the Overwatch team should be addressing more important stuff? Well, no, I don't. Sure, fire being removed from Overwatch is not one of the biggest deals in the world, but it is still a much larger deal than the dev team probably thinks. We addressed this in the first video, but people playing video games want to have a sense that they are in control. Otherwise, they'd be doing something more passive, like watching a movie or reading. But when they lose, it calls into question why. Sure, it's much easier to blame things like luck, or in most cases either the incompetence of your team or lack of grass/women touching the enemy team does. And party games effectively combat this conundrum by specifically making RNG easy to blame. For a game like Overwatch, this feeling is only frustrating, and only exacerbated when the other players are just as in the dark as you are and end up blaming you. If games had the opportunity to remove this obstacle by accurately telling players why they lost, smart ones would, and unlike most games, Overwatch actually has the ability to do this. Sure, like we mentioned before, it's not perfect, but the level of accuracy it has would make losing much less frustrating. Actually cluing players in on whether their team really was just uncarryable, or they need to improve something about their own play, is vital to creating a non-toxic environment where players are actually incentivized to both help their team as well as reflect on their own mistakes. The number one difference I've noticed between average players and high-level players is that high-level players do a lot of reflection on their own mistakes. Maybe it's a bit forceful to outright tell players they're making mistakes, but it's a hell of a lot healthier than creating a hellscape where players have to design their own philosophies about what stats matter and scream it out with the other factions till someone quits. With such a precise and accurate system in the game, one I applaud the original designers of Overwatch for. It would be an absolute shame to see it not only not improved or given more of a spotlight, but completely disregarded in the future of this game we care so much about. This is my love letter to Overwatch's fire system. Don't let it die in vain. Hey guys, it's SetoMarie. I'm actually redoing this outro because originally I just sputter out of control and mumble. I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much. I never expected this much support. You all genuinely mean a lot to me. Except for the mean comments, I've spent an okay amount of time feeling pretty hurt by some of those. But I think that's just the way things work on YouTube. I better get used to that. But it honestly makes it feel like an even bigger deal when I get a nice comment. So again, thank you. I've already started drafting up a third video. It was hard not to start another project when I was working on this one, although that one's going to be a lot less serious. I'm just going to read some comments and answer some questions. I was wondering if you guys like to actually see a series about something I touched on in this video, where I'd look at games where someone flamed someone else who didn't deserve it, or did. I guess that's something I'd assess during the video. And just talk about that, and I'd definitely be touching on the fire system there as kind of an objective look at stuff. No, but let me know if that sounds like something you'd like to see as kind of a series for as long as fire's still around. I also have another idea for one other Overwatch thing, but I'm going to keep that one a secret. And then I also have intended this from the beginning. I'm going to be branching out and evaluating or reviewing game design philosophy of other games. So if you want me to do one, be sure to let me know in the comments. And just let me know what you guys like to see from me. Do you like longer format videos like this that take longer to come out? Would you prefer some shorter things so I can touch on more subjects? They'd probably have to be lower quality. Large portion of the time it took to make this one was actually visuals, and I get that maybe that's not the most important thing in this niche of YouTube. Any support you guys give me helps. If I can somehow make this profitable, it would really be helpful to the quality of my channel and to my life. Your subscription could genuinely help my life. Thank you to everyone who's already been so kind to me. I love you all.